Good afternoon. We are calling the St. Louis County Council Committee of the Whole to order. We are dealing with our departmental budgets this afternoon. It is October 12, 2021. The hour is 1 p.m. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Days.
Here.
Councilmember Dunaway.
Present.
Councilmember Fitch.
Here.
Councilmember Webb. Councilmember Clancy.
Here.
Councilmember Tracus. Councilmember Harder.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We will hear from Mr. Kreidler, the Administration, Performance Management, and Budget Director. He will be presenting the overview of what we're dealing with, of whatever the county executive has proposed for the 2022 budget. The committee takes official notice of and admits into evidence all St. Louis County ordinances and resolutions. Mr. Kreidler, you may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to appear here today to walk you through the county executive's 2022 recommended budget. For the record, again, my name is Paul Kreidler. I'm the Director of Performance Management and Budget, a position that I've held since arriving at the county in 2007. The Division of Performance Management and Budget is organized under the Department of Administration. My staff and I are civil service or merit system employees. We are a team of performance, budget, and data analysts. And we are charged per ordinance with facilitating the creation, execution, and monitoring of an annual budget and business plan for the county, monitoring of the budget, and leading departments and offices in the development, tracking, and reporting of performance indicators. We also manage the county's capital improvement program and debt management programs. And then the dreaded other duties as assigned, as determined by the Director of Administration. We also are directed to provide staff resources to the county executive, the county council, and all departments and offices on performance management and budget matters, including research, data analysis, and recommendations. Before I begin, I'd like to thank my team in the Division of Performance Management and Budget and the leadership and fiscal staff of all of our departments and offices who worked hard and participated in this budget development process to get us to where we are today. My goal today is to provide you with an overview of revenues available to us right now, to review the costs of continuing to provide our existing services, and to review the financial plan and the future outlook for our budget. Your schedule of upcoming hearings will allow you to get into the specific details of each department or office, but I'd like to give you that overview today. So first, revenues. I wanted to, before we talk about 21 and 22, I wanted to give you a recap of the impact of COVID-19 on our revenue structure. On this graphic, I've summarized those revenue sources with the most significant impacts from COVID. This list alone totals about $60 million of revenue loss. But using the U.S. Treasury definition of lost revenue related to the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, our official loss was $86 million in 2020. The three most significant impacts we saw were sales tax, where we lost 7% of our revenue base, hotel tax lost 58%, and gaming taxes lost 40%. And you'll see as we walk through here that we are in various stages of recovery on all of these revenue sources. Here I've plotted out the revenues for all of our budgeted funds. If you look at the pie chart on the right, you'll see that sales tax is now over 50% of all the revenues we receive, with property tax behind it at about 16%. Overall revenues are estimated to increase by $43 million, or almost 6% in 2021 compared to the 2020 actual. In 2022, I'm projecting revenues to grow by $12 million, or 1.6%, with the most significant areas of growth being those that felt the impact of the pandemic. So sales tax up 10% in 2021 and 2% in 2022. The hotel motel tax up 41% in 2021 and another 20% in 2022. And casino taxes growing 37% in 2021 and another 5% in 2022. The revenues summarized at the top Of the chart are our taxes, and those represent 73% of all revenues we receive. And the non-tax revenues on the bottom are 27%. And what we generally tend to see is that most of the change in our revenue forecasts are on the tax side. So on the non-tax side, we usually see a fairly flat revenue projection. So here we're up 0.1% in 2021, and then just 0.9% in 2022. So usually there we see if one source goes up, something else will go down. So if you're focusing on any one thing in terms of revenues, most of that activity will be on the tax side. This summary does not include any potential transfers in from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, commonly referred to as CARES, or the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, commonly referred to as ARPA, and I'll talk about those more in a moment. In terms of our revenue trend, what I wanted to point out for you was that our revenues were fairly flat from 2013 through 2018. And then in 2018, we had the public safety sales tax come online. That put about $50 million of annual revenue into the budget. We have a decrease in 2020, and now we're starting to see recovery in 2021 and 2022. Looking at just the four general funds, that's our general revenue fund, our special road and bridge fund, our health fund, and our park maintenance fund, which support over 90% of our staff and most of our functions. Revenues here are projected to decrease by 0.3% in 2021 and increase about 3.5% in 2022. So this really happens because of allocations of our half-cent transportation sales tax and our county aid road tax, also known as CART, between transportation operations and transportation capital. The operations are shown here. The capital for transportation are in our highway capital construction funds. So if I remove those from this presentation, our revenues would grow about 3.1% in 2021 and another 0.2% in 2022. And that growth is really led by sales tax. If you look at the pie chart on the right, you can see in the general funds, we're much more diversified in our revenues. Sales tax and property tax each account for about a quarter of our revenues. And I think that's important for us because sales tax will react immediately to an economic shock, whereas property tax is a lagging indicator. So what we saw with the recession at the end of the first decade in the 2000s was that sales tax reacted. And when sales tax came back, that's when our assessed values dropped. So that diversification gives us some flexibility in getting through those rough patches. So the two most significant revenue sources for us are property and sales tax. So I want to talk about those in a little more detail. First here, I'm summarizing the tax rates for 2021. We had them certified by the state auditor's office last month, and we have to go through a calculation with them every year to set our tax rates. And in a reassessment year, the state law says that if our assessed value grows, our tax rate must decrease so that we don't produce any additional revenue solely due to reassessment. So looking at residential real estate here, we approved in the budget a 44.3 cent property tax levy, and we were required to certify or roll back our rates to a rate of 41.7 cents. And so that calculation happens in each category of property. The 2022 budget recommends maintaining the existing tax rate at the current levels. Our tax rate ceilings are calculated in reassessment. Our tax rate ceilings are calculated in non-reassessment or even numbered years. So the last time we did this was 2020, and we will do this again next September with the state auditor's office. What I want to show you this for is that we are levying our property tax below our existing tax rate ceiling. So if we look at the general revenue fund line on this table and come over here to residential real estate, our ceiling calculation last year indicated that we could increase that rate by 5.6 cents. For residential real estate, for agricultural real estate, 11 cents, commercial 8 cents, and personal property 7 cents. If we were to roll up all of our rates The estimated revenue, annual revenue we could generate would be $43 million across our 4 main operating funds. I show you this just as an illustration of the revenue available to us if we were to choose to roll up our rates. The council and the executive could pass an ordinance to roll up to our ceiling in any even numbered year. If we wanted to exceed that ceiling, that would require a vote of the people. And if we wanted to increase the tax rate in an odd numbered or a reassessment year, that would also require a vote of the people. So a little more background on assessed values and tax rates, and I wanted to give you some visuals that will help you understand that relationship between the assessed value and the rates. Our assessed value, again, I mentioned it was up 7% in the 2021 reassessment. We're now 36% higher than our recession low assessed value of $21.9 billion. And we've now exceeded our previous high of $25 billion, but that was back from 2008. Tax rates in St. Louis County have not increased since 1985. Again, since 1985. In 2015, 2017, 2019, and 2021, we were required to lower our rates to comply with state law due to increasing assessed values. So I think a better way to look at this is comparing our tax rate to our revenue yield. So here the blue line represents our tax rate. So before 2009, we had growing assessed values, and because our tax rate stayed the same, our revenue yield was increasing. So that's this red line, as this was growing while our tax rate stayed flat. In 2009, the state legislature changed the law to say that we must reduce our tax rate if assessed values grow, so that we don't achieve additional revenue solely due to reassessment outside of an inflationary allowance. So in 2009 through 2015, our tax rate was flat because this was the recession and our values were going down. Since 2015, our rates, as I mentioned, have been decreasing every other year, while our yields have been growing. So we were getting some small value, generally 1% or 2%, growth in property tax just as an inflationary adjustment, even though we were rolling our rates back every year. So I guess the opportunity cost there, or where we used to be able to maintain our rate and have growing source of revenue to continue to support our programs, that changed in 2009. So we will never see a significant growth in property tax revenue unless the rate is changed, unless we roll up our rates. The other important revenue source for us is sales tax. We receive revenue from 9 sales taxes. So if you look at the pie chart on the right, I pulled out the wedges for the 4 sales taxes that are deposited in the general funds. The 1% countywide tax is available for any purpose, and we share that with municipalities. The public safety sales tax is limited to public safety as defined in our ordinances, and that is also shared with municipalities. The Metro Parks and the Arch River taxes are restricted to park activities, and those are deposited in the Park Maintenance Fund. The remaining 5 taxes, so these wedges here that aren't pulled out, are restricted for specific purposes, such as mass transit, transportation, children's services, and emergency communications. So I mentioned that sales taxes decreased by 27 million or 7% back in 2020. And the budget estimates 10% growth in 2021 and an additional 2% in 2022. My 2021 estimate at this point appears to be low. We currently are up about 12% year over year in sales tax. That's through 8 months of data. In 2022, I'm being cautious due to concerns over COVID variants, inflation, waning consumer confidence. So my approach is that I tend to be conservative on my revenue estimates. And if I miss an estimate, I want to be able to come back to you and say, we have additional revenue available for you, as opposed to saying we missed a revenue estimate and we now have to cut budgets. To show you the current status of the economy, I show you this. This is our Prop M quarter-cent mass transit sales tax. We use this because it's not subject to TIFs or other adjustments, so it is probably the best reflection of economic activity in the county. And here we smooth out the revenue to smooth away the impacts of the cyclical nature of the tax. So we can see here this first big drop off is due to the recession. We then built back and we had a very steep drop off due to COVID and a very steep recovery. And so we're continuing that recovery now. Related but different from sales tax is a use tax. And the county executive in his budget message stated that now is the time to consider putting the question of a use tax for out-of-state purchases on the ballot to provide additional revenue for county operations and level the playing field for brick and mortar retailers in the county. A recent state fiscal note indicated that the state could see 60 million, local governments could see 60 million of revenue from a use tax. And just trying to extrapolate that out to the county, we think that could be in the $10 to $15 million range for county government. So the use tax is not a sales tax. It is a separate tax that mirrors our sales tax rate and would be available for general county operations. Okay, that's the revenue picture. Moving on to a summary of the recommended budget itself, or the appropriations side of the recommended budget. Just in terms of the budget policy we set out with our departments, general revenue departments were instructed to provide zero growth budgets to us. So that is no expansion of services, no additional staff, unless costs were unavoidable. And there I'm looking at things like lease agreements or other contracts. All other funds were based on the availability of money within those funds. So I know sometimes I hear questions go to departments about why didn't you ask for this or that? And the departments are required to follow the budget policy that we set for them. Looking at a summary of the entire budget, the county executive's recommended budget for 2022 is $918 million. This is an increase of $55 million or 6% from the 2021 level. The budget is composed of 3,500 separate appropriations from 25 individual funds. Each fund has its own sources of revenue and allowable uses, and a separately managed financial plan. So money from one fund generally cannot be redirected to another fund for use. When appropriate, funds can write checks back and forth, such as for central service charges or say Spirit purchasing police services from the police department. But in general, one fund does not impact another. To give you a better understanding of the budget, I think I need to walk you through the fund groups. So we've looked at the bottom line total. Now I direct your attention to the 4 funds at the top. These are our general funds. They are the main operating funds of county government. They support more than 94% of our employees and most of our functions. Appropriations for these funds increase by $50 million or 10%. And I'll walk you through some of the reasons for those increases in a moment. If we move down to the next line, special revenue funds, there are 15 special revenue funds, such as the Assessment Fund, the Emergency Communications Fund, and the Children's Service Fund, to name a few. The recommended budget for these funds decreases by $22 million or 16%, and most of that is due to a reduction in the Convention and Recreation Trust Fund. We've removed the $15 million appropriation for pre-construction costs for the Convention Center project. We had assumed that those would be complete, or that our bonds would be issued. If that doesn't happen, then we'll have to revisit that at a later date. And we also assume that the Hazelwood Ball Fields project, $6 million, will be complete by the end of the year. And if that doesn't happen, we'll need to revisit that appropriation as well. Moving down, the debt service fund is used to pay debt service for all of the county's general obligation bonds. So those are backed by a specific property tax. At the end of 2021, we'll have $69 million of outstanding principal from GO bonds. We're using 1.7% of our legal GO debt limit of $2.8 billion. Our recent refunding transactions will save taxpayers $12 million in interest costs over the remaining life of the bonds, which run through the year 2033. Next is our Spirit of St. Louis Airport Enterprise Fund. This is a fund that operates similar to a business. So the airport raises money through the sale of fuel, and that is used to support their operations. So all of these funds combined make up what we call our operating budget. It's a total of $694 million, an increase of almost $30 million or 4.4%. The operating budget is the primary means by which most of the financing, acquisition, spending, and service delivery activities of the county are financed. And I would say if you're reviewing a budget, the operating budget is the best comparison of year over year. We have 4 other funds shown below the operating budget total line. Those are the 2 funds we use to distribute funding to bi-state development for public mass transit and our highway capital construction funds that support our construction activity. And those will vary significantly year to year. So that's why they're excluded from an operating budget comparison. So I mentioned the total budget. Now to review the highlights of what's included in the budget. I'll go by programmatic group first. Countywide, we have a number of changes that impact all departments and offices. First is $5.2 million increase for a salary increase for those employees who are not covered by a collective bargaining agreement. So basically that's everyone other than the police department and a small group in the Department of Public Health. By COLA Plus, we are envisioning a program that will provide all employees with a base COLA, cost of living adjustment, regardless of their performance, set based on the CPI. So for the sake of discussion, let's say that's 2%. So every employee would get that base 2% and then have the opportunity to achieve up to an additional 2% for a total of 4% based on their performance. That's different than the program we ran this fiscal year, which was solely based on performance. So if you were rated as unsuccessful, you received 0 increase all the way up to 6%. An increase of $3.5 million is needed to fund fringe benefit costs. We had an increase in medical insurance costs that we split between plan design changes and county investment. We had an increase necessary to fund our workers' comp liabilities. And we also have funding in the budget to support the retiree COLA that was recommended by the pension board. So that COLA would provide a 10% cost of living adjustment to the retirement benefit for those employees who retired before January 1 of 2011. And that would go into effect if all passed by January 1 of 2022, would be amortized over a 25-year period. So we think that that cost will impact us by about $2 million per year. So the retirement budget that we've set aside in this recommendation will cover that cost. We have $1.2 million for our self-insurance program. As you know, this is the program that supports any of our liability settlements, our commercial insurance policies, vehicle repair, and so forth. So we effectively assign a premium cost to every department and fund to help support that fund. So those costs are going up $1.2 million in 2022. This fund does not include employee health care, which is in the medical insurance account. We have $500,000 budgeted for a comprehensive pay study. We know that our pay is below market, and we have significant compression issues caused by years of pay freezes. And we also have some inequities between new employees and existing employees. For example, we may have to pay market rate to attract a new employee, and that amount could be higher than someone who's been here for years and years. So a study would help us identify strategies to correct these problems and also to quantify their costs. And then finally, on the countywide list, we have about $300,000 for the final step in implementing a $15 minimum wage across county government. Moving to economic development and infrastructure, we have $1 million in the Department of Planning for a land use plan. The charter requires this plan to be produced every 5 years. This will help the county create an environment that promotes health and wellness, reduces the impact on climate and environment, promotes job creation, and reduces the fiscal burden of development. And planning will talk about that more with you during their hearing. We have $1 million for facility maintenance. We have a backlog of well over $100 million of facility maintenance projects. In the past few years, we've been able to budget somewhere between $0 and $250,000 to maintain our facilities. We know that costs us more in the long run, and we've got to reverse that trend. Ideally, we would budget $5 million per year for maintenance, but we're not able to achieve that in this budget, but we are trying to set a base investment of at least $1 million. We have a $2 million increase in Spirit Airport, and that's for fuel sales. Mr. Bales will be here shortly to talk to you about that. $700,000 for the small business, the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership. will allow them to convert some small business rapid deployment fund loans into grants, develop a small business portal, and supplement staffing and employee pay. And a $15 million increase in the highway capital construction program will support $67 million of project activity, including $55 million of construction work in 2021 and prior years. Moving forward in health and well-being, we have an increase of $18.5 million for the Department of Public Health. And that will provide the funding necessary to continue the county's response to COVID-19, including testing, vaccinations, staffing for neighborhood clinics, costs related to prevention and corrections medicine, staffing for primary care, mental health, substance use, and comorbidities care, and resources to support the opioid strategy plan. In public safety, we have $4 million for police pay programs tied to collective bargaining agreements. The prosecuting attorney has requested $3.2 million to add 28 new positions, including 13 attorneys and 15 legal secretaries. In the family court, we have an increase of $2.2 million and 22 positions to fund the Raise the Age legislation, which increased the age to be charged as an adult in criminal cases from 17 to 18 years. So that increases the population that the family court works with. This also comes with matching state revenue, so there is no net budget impact to this cost. Finally, in public safety, the municipal court increases almost $1 million to increase pay for judges and provisional judges, convert 2 judge positions to full-time, add 2 additional provisional judges, and add 13 clerks to support expanded dockets and programs. These investments are designed to reduce the court's large case backlog and improve overall service. Finally, in general government, we have $3.3 million for the administration of elections. That's kind of an every other year cost, and the county is responsible for funding those costs, as the chair knows. $2.8 million in information technology to transform our constituent service experience, automate more processes, improve virtual meeting platforms, and consolidate our phone systems. $700,000 for staffing and an e-discovery software for the county counselor's office. I mentioned previously the Convention Recreation Trust Fund changes. That's the convention center pre-construction costs and the Hazelwood Ball Fields project. Down in debt service fund due to refunding, and up in mass transit funds due to increasing sales tax projections. Let me mention, just before I move on, the mass transit funds. There are bond documents that require us to appropriate all anticipated sales taxes, but the county council every July approves a budget for bi-state. So none of those funds will be distributed past July 1st until the county council takes action on the bi-state budget for their next fiscal year. And we write that into the appropriation ordinance, memorializing that fact. So it is possible that if the council approves a lower budget than the sales tax estimates, we will just have excess appropriation authority that will lapse at the close of the fiscal year. Looking at the operating budget by function, you can see on the left that public safety is our largest area of spending at 37%. That includes police, courts, the Justice Center, and the prosecuting attorney. That's followed by health and well-being and economic development. On the right, I plotted out the change, year-over-year change in those programmatic areas. And you've heard me mention these, but just in terms of where they fall in this chart, economic development is due to fuel at Spirit, facility maintenance costs, and the land use plan. Health and well-being is for public health to fund ongoing COVID activities. Public safety is growth in police costs and family court and municipal court. And general government is, again, due to that reduction in the Convention and Recreation Trust Fund. If we look at the operating budget by category, and I neglected to mention that prior chart was just the operating budget. So here's the operating budget by category. And again, looking at the pie chart, you can see salaries and fringe benefits make up 55% of our total. If we were to limit this chart to just the 4 general funds, that number would be 68%. And there are a number of departments who are made up of more than 90% of salary and fringe benefit costs. Looking at the right, purchase services are primarily up due to medical services and public health. Commodities and supplies increased due to fuel at Spirit, facility maintenance and software costs. Other expenses are up due to the emergency fund allocation and self-insurance program costs. Transfer payments are down, again, due to the Convention Recreation Trust Fund. And capital is down because 2021 included a one-time capital land purchase at Spirit Airport. In terms of positions, we have 80 additional positions in this budget for 76.3 FTEs. Significant changes include 15 additional in the municipal court, 22 in judicial administration for Raise the Age, 27 requested by the prosecuting attorney, 5% for the county counselor's office, and 30 for the Department of Public Health to maintain their existing service levels. So before we move on to the financial plan where we marry revenues and appropriations, there are things that aren't included in this budget, few that I've mentioned already. Again, we know what our salary issues are in terms of being below the market and the compression caused by years of pay freezes. Facilities management, we should be investing $5 million a year for $150 million of outstanding facility needs, and that excludes the $50 million necessary to add sprinklers to this building. In roads, ideally, we'd invest $100 million per year, but we don't have the revenues to support this. So just something to keep in the back of your mind as we move forward. So moving to the financial plan, the most, I think, important piece to understand is the proposed allocation of ARPA funds in this budget. As you know, the county has received a $193 million allocation from the State and Local Fiscal Relief Fund of ARPA. And the county executive's budget recommends recovering all funds that have not yet been appropriated under the lost revenues provision of the federal legislation. This says that we can recover revenues that we lost due to the pandemic as long as we then use them for an allowable purpose. So for us, the most likely uses would be public safety and public health services. We can then use these funds to continue operating at existing service levels for several more years. And I'll walk you through that more in a moment. So here in 2021, we received $96.6 million. The council has already appropriated $3.2 million. And we would recommend recovering the full 2020 revenue loss of $85.6 million. And then we would recover the rest of that 2021 advanced funding based on 2021 lost revenues. In 2022, we would finish out recovering our 2021 lost revenue and then take the rest from 2022. If we look at revenues that we lost per the Treasury guidelines from 2020 through 2023, we would be approaching $300 million. So we could document revenue losses that far exceed the amount of revenue available to us. The budget then further proposes, and you'll see this more in the individual funds financial plan, that we allocate these funds to public safety services and public health services and the general revenue fund and the health fund, both in 2021 and 2022. You'll see in our long-term forecast what that does for the financial health of the budget going forward. So here I've summarized for you our 2021 financial plan. So I'm showing you the plan for each fund, but I'll talk about the general fund and I'll walk you through that. The first line here is our beginning balance at the beginning of 2021 on a budget basis. So that's almost $60 million. Then we look at how much revenue we think we'll receive, and that's $299 million. I'm estimating $317 million worth of spending. So that gives us a deficit of $17.6 million or 5.6%. And so if you ever hear me talk about a structural surplus or a structural deficit, I'm referring to that comparison of revenues collected in a given year versus spending in that year. We would like for that number to be a positive number. We'd like to not have a structural deficit. We'd like to be building fund balance, and that fund balance would be something we could then use for one-time costs or capital investment or to insulate ourselves when we have an economic downturn. So we're running that deficit here of again, $18 million or almost 6%. We're actually projecting a small deficit in each of the 4 general funds, so for a total of $25 million, or again, 5.6%. But the most concerning for me are the General Revenue Fund and the Health Fund, and we'll talk about those a little more in a moment as we get into 2022. I'm also showing here adjustments, which will be the transfer in of the recommended ARPA funds that we will again use for public safety and public health programs. So after we add these funds in, we would have an ending balance in the general fund of 105.4 million or a reserve of 35.3%. What this does not yet show is the potential allocation of any remaining coronavirus relief fund or CARES fund dollars that remain at the end of this calendar year upon the expiration of the program. We have 13 million of those funds unallocated, 23 million uncommitted, and 35 million unspent as of October 7th. And we have dedicated payroll costs for public health and public safety that far exceed that amount. So there is the potential that this bottom line number could improve if we recover those funds. And we'll know that again at the close of the year. Moving forward to 2022, I've got to show you two versions of the budget. The first is the calculation required by our charter. So this shows, if you look at, again, here we're carrying forward our ending balances, but then we have what we call the lower of revenue. And the charter says that we have to look at our 2022 revenue estimate and our 2021 estimate and take whichever number is lower. And that's the number we can budget off of. So for the general fund, that's 297.8 million. And then we show our full appropriation recommended. So that's 361 million. So in the general fund, we would have a budgeted deficit of 63 million or 17.5%. In the health fund, that budgeted deficit would be 42 million or 46%. We're also showing transfers in from the ARPA funds of 48.5 million for the general fund and 48.1 million for the health fund. So we would have 120, looking at all four of these funds, we'd have 124.3 million or 22.7 more in appropriations than we have revenues available in the budget. While the amount of this budgeted deficit is higher than it has been in prior years, it's very typical for us to have a budgeted deficit of well over 40 or $50 million. And that's because we know that we will not spend the full appropriation. Despite anyone's best effort, it is virtually impossible to spend 100% of your budget. History tells us that we will spend only about 92 or 93% of our budget every year. So here is what I think our 2022 budget looks like and how it will execute. So again, I'll focus here on the general fund. We'll start the year with 105 million in our fund balance or our reserve. We'll take in 299 million of revenue. We'll spend 336 million. So that is a structural deficit that I'm projecting of 37 million or 11%. Again, we have our transfer in. The second round of ARPA transfers in would leave us with 117 million in our reserve or a reserve of 39%. On the health fund side, our estimated structural deficit, 27.1 million or 35%. Again, here comes our second round of ARPA funds, leaving us with a $77.3 million fund balance. If we choose not to utilize ARPA funds under the lost revenue provision to maintain public safety and public health services, we must identify at least $37 million of appropriation reductions. That'd be 19 million in the general revenue fund and 18 million in the health fund. If we wanted to achieve an ending 2022 reserve of 10% in these funds, that number would increase to $41 million of necessary appropriation cuts. And to have a structurally balanced budget, we would need to identify $64 million of spending cuts in 2022. To help visualize this, I think those of you who have seen this presentation from me in the past are used to this graphic. Here in the blue line, I've plotted our revenues. So again, we have our bump up from Prop P in 2017 and 2018, and our drop due to COVID, and then our minimal revenue growth going forward. Now when I add the red line, these are our expenditures. So you'll see that we are projecting deficits in each of these years going forward, structural deficits. When I add in fund balance, you can see a bump here in 2021 and 2022. and these are the transfers in of the ARPA funds. And then finally, this purple line is our fund balance target. So we'd like our fund balance to never dip below 10% of annual revenues. And that does a number of things. It helps us maintain our bond rating. It helps us weather any economic downturns or deal with any other unforeseen expenses. So we'll have 2 years of transfers in from the ARPA funds. And then the deficit that we're running will start to consume fund balance. So we would be able to get through 2024 before we dip below our operational guidelines. And 2025 is when we would run out of funds. And obviously we cannot go negative. We would have to do something here. And this is really just my planning tool that I look at what the world might look like if what I know today holds true. So I assume that we'll be funding pay increases. We may have some increases in our fringe benefit costs. Supplies will cost more. The cyclical nature of elections, I've taken that into account, debt service costs. So I use this and I update it very frequently to try to model out what the future could look like. And as I said, we can't let ourselves go negative. We can't declare bankruptcy. We can't deficit spend like the federal government can. So we would be forced to take action here by 24 or 25. But the ARPA funds will allow you to get there without any other revenue enhancements or service eliminations. I wanted to show you Prop P because I know that's top of mind for many of you. Again, the same demonstration here. Revenues are blue, expenditures are red. We've talked about it in the past that we are, as we make additional commitments that are eligible for Prop P per our ordinances, we will exceed that annual revenue. So once that happens and our fund balance that's attributable to Prop P is gone, I would say the distinction between a general revenue dollar and a Prop P dollar is no longer relevant. Commitments made by the executive or the council for public safety eligible costs, such as police collective bargaining agreements, will just become a general revenue commitment of the county, and we will fund them as such. I wanted to show you the same visual for the health fund. Here, the revenues, again, very flat. Their expenditures are really jumping here in 2022 as we bring in all of the continued COVID response costs into the health fund. So instead of funding them through the CARES fund, we're proposing that we bring those ARPA funds in under the lost revenue provision and we spend those from the public health fund. I don't know how long we'll have to stay in this heightened state for COVID, so I've just trended those expenditures out over time. But obviously, if we were able to scale back on those, that would change this analysis significantly. When we look at their fund balance, we see, because they're dealing with smaller dollar numbers, the impact of that on their fund balance is more dramatic. So we're adding money into the fund balance through transfers in from ARPA in 2021 and 2022. And then this structural deficit here is consuming those revenues. So we would get again to 2024 or 2025 before we'd be at the end of the road there. And this purple line is our fund balance target. So that concludes my overview, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee has.
Thank you very much. Questions from the council?
Madam Chair, one moment. I just want to note for the record that Councilman Tracus is in attendance.
Oh, okay. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Questions for Mr. Kreidler? Councilman Fitch.
I'll go first. Just a couple, Paul. And for the rest of the council, I did ask Paul yesterday in an email to provide the council with a list of each department's increase requests. You know, how much their budget is going up and what those increases cover. I wanted to see a one document page to do that because I didn't see it in the presentation. Although I know it's built into this, I just want to see it on a one page. I wondered, basically with all the revenue losses that you talked about, have you benchmarked with any of our peers like St. Charles County, for example, which would be kind of our closest peer, on what their revenue losses were compared to ours as far as a percentage goes? Has there been any benchmarking at all?
I have not with St. Charles County. We could certainly do that.
Yeah, what I'm curious to know is what the impact of St. Louis County's lockdowns, restaurant closures, all of that were compared to a place like St. Charles County. You know, what did our revenues look like compared to theirs? Were theirs up, were theirs down? We're curious to know the economic impact of those lockdowns. And the next question is the CARES money that's got to be spent by the end of the year, end of this year.
Right.
There's still a balance in that fund. The last time I looked, it was around 20 million, 22 million. Do you know what the balance is?
Yeah, there's 13 million uncommitted. There's about 20, 25 million unencumbered
Right.
and about 30 million unspent. And so we will be able to recover any remaining balance under the dedicated payroll provisions of that program at the close of it. So that could impact the financial plan in a positive way.
And that's what my question is what impact will those dollars that are left remaining make on this? So this budget can completely change that you just presented.
We could, we could potentially recover up to another 30 million, but that will still just push our, our wall there by a few months. So we'd still be around 2024, 2025 before we would have to take some significant action.
Well, in 2024 is the end of the ARPA fund, the deadline for that, December 2024. Is that right?
Right, but we would recover all of those funds in 2021 and 2022 under the lost revenue provision.
So the money that you have suggested, the county executive suggested using for lost revenue in 2020, that dollar amount was at 85 million and some change?
That's right, 86.
86 million. That 86 million, why wouldn't we take that CARES money and apply it to that before it expires?
Well, we will grab any remaining CARES dollars, but that wouldn't change our recommendation to recover the entire ARPA award under the lost revenue provision.
Okay, but it would extend, instead of going all the way through 2022 lost revenue, you could go into 2023 lost revenue, right?
No, we would take any remaining CARES fund or coronavirus relief fund at the end of this year,
Right.
and then continue by taking the entire ARPA allocation under lost revenue in 21 and 22. What that does is, we have to use it for eligible activities, so public safety or public health, but that will increase our bottom line reserve to help us get a little further down towards 2024, 2025, before we'd have to make significant changes to our revenue or our program structure.
Okay, and I'm still confused. So the balance that's in the CARES Act money that has to be spent by the end of this year, what's going to happen to that?
If it's not spent on programs and activities, we will apply it to what's termed dedicated payroll. So that's police and public health costs during the pandemic. We can then recover that into the general revenue fund and the health fund, and that will then improve our bottom line position or our reserve at the end of 2021.
Okay, so it does still have to all be spent by the end of 20.
Right,
2021.
maybe that's our disconnect.
Yeah.
For me, spending could occur as reimbursement for those payroll costs.
Okay. So the 2020, you want to recover funds for 2020, is that right?
Right,
That budget's already passed. It's over and done with. So recovering funds means taking that money and putting it in the bank. Is that a fair statement?
right. We would have to apply it to our dedicated payroll, and then we could move it into our operating funds. And the end result would be an increase in our ending fund balance. But we've got to make sure we follow the proper federal guidelines for how we document all of that.
Okay, and then the money that you're suggesting we spend on public safety and health, ARPA fund money, that money, how do you know that, has Deloitte looked at those expenditures that are suggested? Have we identified where that money would go? Because I can tell you this, I have submitted multiple requests to Deloitte ARPA funds related to public safety. For example, we all know that the police department needs a new CAD system. We heard Councilwoman Dunaway talk about that last week. We know that's about $2.5 million. You know what they say? You can't use ARPA funds for that. So how do you know what you're dumping into public safety will be allowed for ARPA fund expenditure?
Well, we've had a conversation with Deloitte already to review our revenue loss calculations and talk about the strategy. The federal legislation allows us to maintain our public safety and public health activities. So we would take those ARPA funds, allocate them to, for the sake of simplicity, let's say police operations and public health operations. We can then take the funds that we were going to use for those activities, supplant those, and then use those for whatever the council were to approve.
I love that word, supplant. I think I hear what you're saying is, well, let me ask you this. The $2.5 million they want for the new CAD system, That's not built anywhere into this budget, is that right?
That's right.
So how do you build that in there and then still use the ARPA funds to pay for it?
You don't use the ARPA funds, you use supplanted general revenue.
Okay,
to pay for
I
it.
get the feel. Yeah, and supplanted general revenue are ARPA funds.
No, those are general revenue dollars.
But
The ARPA funds would all go specifically to police and public health operations.
right,
The money that we had been planning to use for those could be reprogrammed.
I'd call that a workaround. Is that a fair statement?
I don't think I want to describe.
We'll get the county councilor worked up here. So, yeah, that's what it sounds like it's happening is, okay, yeah, we can't just go out and write a check for a new CAD system with ARPA funds. But we could build the CAD system into the police budget and then take ARPA funds and dump it into lost revenue into the general revenue stream. Is that what I'm saying?
I think you have to be careful to maintain the order of operations. It's documenting the lost revenue, using it for public safety or public health. And the end result of that is you will have some flexible funds available to you to use as the council deems fit.
Okay. A workaround. Okay. Let's see, next, Madam Chair, if you others have questions, I can
Go
come back.
ahead.
Can I
Okay,
follow
keep
up on
going.
something
Oh,
real
go ahead.
quick? Related to the conversation about the CARES Act money, how much of the remaining CARES funds are unencumbered?
Unencumbered are about 20 to 24 million.
Okay, so that 20 to 24 million figure reflects unencumbered. Okay, I wasn't sure if
Unencumbered,
that
right.
reflected unencumbered or if that was literally just what we have. all
Yeah,
of
there's
it.
about 24 million unencumbered,
Okay.
about 30 million unspent.
Okay,
Is that it? Out of CARES?
Right.
So we're
Out
talking
of the
about
coronavirus relief.
54 million?
No, that's the same population. If we start from the unexpended 30 million, unencumbered 24 million-ish, and about 13 million that we haven't even allocated out of reserve.
So we started with 173.5 million. And right now we have either not chosen to spend 24 million and we have 30 million that we have in a bucket, but we haven't spent it yet. Just clear
Right,
up
so
those
there are
terms.
some existing encumbrances that get you from the 30 million to the 20 to 24
Okay.
million.
you said 13 million hasn't even been allocated.
Right.
Does that mean it's up for grabs, so to speak?
That's truly free and available as of
Okay,
last week, the close
Okay.
of last week.
And this is the money the council basically signed over and gave the permission to the county executive to spend however he deemed necessary. Is that right? That 13 million that's really not been spent,
Yeah, that was
he
appropriated.
could use
in
that for whatever he
2020.
wants to until the end of the year.
Correct.
And has there been any talk about where that 13 million is going to go? Are you familiar?
Well, I'm certainly encouraging us to use that and allocate that between the general fund and the health fund. Anything that's remaining will be, again, we'll report that for our dedicated payroll costs. And then we would split that up between those two funds to help improve their position going forward.
Okay. Switch gears, if, Madam Chair, if I keep
Go ahead.
going. So the $15 an hour that we've budgeted for, that will accomplish that for every position in 2022. Is that how I read that?
That's right. This is the final year of a 3-year phase in.
So that means every full-time employee will make about $31,200 a year,
Right.
except council members, by the way. So we'll be the lowest paid full-time employees in county government if I have that right. I just wanted, so I think that comes out to about $9.
You're not full-time, Councilman Fitch, you know that, right?
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
We're not
Councilman
full-time,
Tracus?
you know that.
Right.
Councilman
I'm just
Tracus?
joking with Councilman
All
Fitch,
right,
that's all.
Okay, all right.
So let's go back to the county councilor's office. What was their increase in headcount?
5 positions.
And those are attorneys or,
I have it here.
because we added 5, are these the 5 attorneys we've already added or are these another 5 attorneys?
These are an additional 5.
positions.
It's 2 attorneys, 2 paralegals, and 1 investigator.
So 5 more in addition to, 5 more employees in addition to the 5 attorneys we've already added this year.
That's right.
Okay, just want to make sure I had that right. Remember last year we had a little problem with $150,000 in lobbyist funds that were in the budget? Are those in the budget buried here somewhere that I can't find? Do you know?
Those are in our special projects division within the department organized as miscellaneous offices. That's where we've traditionally funded those things that are countywide but don't fall within any specific department.
Do you know if there's money in there for lobbyists for 2022?
Yes, the
And how
same
much
amount
is
is
that?
there. I believe
150,000?
150,000.
That's what it was. How much?
I believe it's still 150,000. I'll verify.
Okay. And then moving on to the $500,000 for comprehensive pay study. You know, after being here for 31 years, I've seen many pay studies. And usually at the end of it, they say your employees deserve a raise, and then we say we don't have the money to give it to them. So where is this coming from, this comprehensive pay study that somebody wants another one?
Well, I think for us to solve the problem, we need to fully understand the issue and understand and appreciate how far behind the market we are, and also get some information on strategies to fix our problem. You know, I know that we effectively fixed the compression problem in the police department in 2018 with Prop P funds, and that was what, a $30 million change. So that we know that this would be extraordinarily expensive to fix, but we've got to have the data at some point to understand that, and then also to see what recommendations could we get on how we phase that in to fix it over time.
Will this be every position in county government that will be looked at for, you know, how benchmarking on pay? Or is it certain positions?
I think we would first certainly look at the merit system and then see what all we could afford. You know, 500,000 is an estimate. We'd have to see what those actual responses came in at.
Okay, so that might have to be adjusted.
Yeah, the goal would be to fix our entire pay plan.
Do you know when the last time we did a pay study was?
I believe the last time was 2012. There was work on one during the prior county executive's term, but I don't believe it was ever finalized.
Okay. And use tax, going back to your conversation about use tax, we've tried to pass one of those before, correct?
Around 2003, if my memory serves me right. Back then it was on business purchases out of state, and there was a funding formula in the state law that required it to be split between, if I remember correctly, parks, economic development, and then maybe general government. And now it would be available for any county purpose.
Okay. All right. And then my last one for now is the special road and bridge tax. You said if we'd roll it up to the legalized amount, it'd bring it about, was it 3.6 million? Does that sound right?
Right, and that number is so low because 76% of every dollar we receive gets distributed to the municipalities.
And that's why I was going to ask, why is that number so low?
Right, that's
Okay.
why.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Paul, let me go, I want to go back to the CAD system there. And if we have those funds that have not been spent, why cannot we use the 2.5 million of that to fund that system?
Well, we'd have to look to see if it's eligible under the Coronavirus Relief Fund. But again, my recommendation would be to take any of those remaining funds, use them for an allowable purpose, which would then free up an equivalent amount of existing revenue. And then you could certainly appropriate for that CAD system from just the general fund reserve.
But we don't know if it is not an allowable expenditure
Yeah,
at
I
this
don't know
particular point,
offhand.
right?
I don't know
Has anyone
myself.
looked into that?
I have not. looked into
Okay, well,
CAD.
we probably need to do that. Let me go to also, we had part of the CARES funding, we had an economic development plan. I believe that was chaired by Rick Stevens from Christian Hospital. And several people worked on that, and none of that has been funded. Do you know what the amount of funding that particular plan was?
I do not off the top of my
Okay,
head.
well, this council had decided that it wanted to spend the ARPA funds in two buckets. One was the economic development, and of course, the other was public safety. But if we have already a plan and it was not funded in the original CARES Act, I think we need to check, we need to make sure that if that happened under that particular fund, that we see what kind of funding that they need and it can go for that. Do we anticipate any kind of clawback from CARES?
I do not. We have over $60 million of dedicated payroll that we've documented, and that just went through November of 2020. So we have far more documented costs than we do revenue available. So I'm comfortable that we will be able to recover all of those dollars.
Okay. You indicated earlier, and this was going to be my very first question, that of your direction to the departments that they were to have a zero growth budget. I don't think your message went over too well. You?
Well, we told them zero growth in terms of no expansion of program activities. You know,
Or staff.
no additional staff.
Okay.
We did tell them that we understand that there are cost increases that are unavoidable. The one that always jumps to the top of my mind first are lease costs in the Department of Public Works. There are other offices that chose not to follow those instructions. And, that's their decision. And then we move on from that once they submit.
So that means that we will have to make the difficult decisions on that one. On the Prop P funds, have we ever had any kind of an audit or anything on the Prop P funding? It sometimes, it seemed to me in my just short period being here that fund just was kind of went everywhere except probably public safety in many instances. And of course, that's a very loose term. Have we ever had that fund audited?
Our external auditor reviews the ending balance of that as part of their financial compliance audit every year. I track those expenditures, so I will say with 100% certainty that all of those costs have gone to public safety expenses as authorized in the ordinance.
Well, I know there was some concern about televisions and things like that. I'm not sure how that helped with public safety, but I know that those expenditures were out there as well. Let's go to, we're talking about the tax rates, and I wrote here, when was the last roll-up that we had of our taxes? When was that?
1985 was the last year our tax rate went up.
1985. However, nobody's really wanting to do that. All right, I think that's all I have for right now. Paul, let me go to someone else. Anyone else have any questions for Paul at this point? Councilman Harder.
Thank you. I guess I want to go back to the CARES Act money again. I'm curious why, well, let me ask this question. So if we don't spend the 25 million and then that's, or 30 million, whatever it may be, if we don't spend that, what happens to that money?
Well, we would spend it in terms of how we document our costs with the federal government. We would spend it to reimburse ourselves for what's called dedicated payroll. So those eligible police costs and public health costs from 2020.
Okay, so in your mind, you spent this in our budget, correct? So we'll have a zero balance with the federal government at the end of this year, correct?
One way or another. Right?
One way or the other, you've already allocated in your mind, but not on paper, where that money's going. Is that true?
That's right.
Okay, so if that's the case, why is that not reflected as a ending balance of 2021 going forward in this budget?
Well, I didn't include it in our transfers in 2021 because I don't know what the number will be yet. And I didn't want to cloud the picture with this kind of wild card. It could be somewhere between 0 and 30 million. So once we know that number, then we'll certainly revise our financial plan and share that with the council.
But you said you're going to spend it all. So in one way or another, it's going to go somewhere, correct? So why wouldn't, in your estimates, and we know these are estimates, why wouldn't you reflect that as the ending balance of this year going forward, which bumps up all the subsequent years as well?
So I think you need to remember that the CARES fund is outside of the operating budget that we produce every year. So if these dollars get spent directly from the CARES fund, then we will not see any impact on this budget that we provided to you. If we choose to recover those as dedicated payroll, then we will see that come in to our bottom line. So I need to know where it's going to be spent, how much, and when that will happen. So once I know that, then I will update my financial plan. But I need to have relative certainty before I include that in my estimates.
Can you give us a revised budget, maybe with an asterisk that shows that? Because it sounds like you've already committed to this money to payroll, correct? So that's going to reflect that in that ending balance, correct?
The only thing that will show up in this budget would be a transfer in of any funds, again, used for dedicated payroll. But I could certainly show you what that financial plan would look like if we grabbed, say, $25 million of that to show you how it would change the math.
Because that would also change the projections in outside years, right?
Right. It would increase that balance, the fund balance, and it would change the slope as we spend that balance down and go towards the negative. It would change that slope a bit.
Right. So I would like to see that in some form or another so that we're comparing apples to apples and knowing that that money will be spent. The ARPA money has a different purpose on it because it has, we have jurisdiction over where that money goes. So your recommendations when it comes to that is just that, a recommendation, correct? to this
Right,
council.
Right, yes. I mean, I'm recommending that from my viewpoint in the budget office, in the performance management budget office. I think that gives the council the greatest flexibility. And it would also help us to reduce some of the ancillary costs of consulting and reporting, because it would be fairly clean for us to document, number one, our revenue loss, number two, our allocation and use of those funds for public health and public safety. And then we wouldn't go through some of the required federal oversight if, say, you were running a new small business relief program, for example, directly from those federal funds.
So if we use the 85 million per year that you have in here in slide 29, I believe it is. You put that in 2020, you got it in 2021, and then I guess the remaining balance in 2022. So if you put those in, are you also accounting for, even though you're throwing that in, are you also making an adjustment or thinking that we'll have a supplanting value equal to that we can use for other things, since this is paying for our down revenue?
Yes, that's the end result of, if you look at our ending balance in those 2 years in 2021 and 22, and going forward, is that's the end result, is that increases, which is then available for whatever else the council appropriates.
Okay, are we going to have a dollar for dollar value in supplanting funds
You
for
would,
that value?
you would.
So 85 million comes in, we take 85 million that you've budgeted, and that 85 million would be used for other things that we would see
Right.
fit. So really, we're getting a double hit in that budget year on revenue.
No, we record it as a transfer in, so it won't impact our revenue amount. So you'll just take money from ARPA for lost revenues, plug it in to public health and public safety, and then take that same amount and move that into fund balance.
Because that money from missed revenue is from previous years.
Correct.
So it's like a bonus check paying us back for what we missed in 2020,
Right.
correct?
It's allowing us to continue to maintain our programs and services.
So that's a big piece of this, and I think we need to see that updated in some projection form or another, so we know what that is going forward. On the, going back to your projections on the things that are, so it'd be, I guess, slide 15, 16. So budget highlights. On the COLA, we gave increases in pay this past year, correct?
The current year, 2021.
In 2021. Okay, and that was how much percent?
That was between 0 and 6%, depending on an employee's performance.
Okay, so that was not a COLA, but a performance
Right.
increase.
And we required the departments and offices to average 3%. So the average increase received was right at that 3%.
Okay, so what you're projecting here is how much on COLA percent-wise?
So the COLA would again be based on what the current CPI is. We would implement this in June, and I think it's right around 2%. So every employee would receive that base cost of living adjustment and then have the opportunity to achieve up to an additional 2% based on performance. So for a total possible of 4%.
Okay. And that performance is determined in what way?
Through the employee's annual evaluation from their supervisor.
Okay. On the retiree COLA, they haven't gotten a COLA in 20 years, have they?
I believe 2005 might have been the last year.
2005?
Yes.
And so I was always under the impression that we couldn't give those unless our fund balance was about 80% in the retirees fund. Is that true?
I think that is, that 80% funded ratio being the sign of health of a retirement plan, I think is a generally accepted funding ratio when you talk about retirement plans, but there's no requirement that I'm aware of that it needs to be at 80%.
And so using that as a rule of thumb, what is ours currently?
I believe Jen, do you remember, are we around 72%? I'll verify that for you at our last valuation, which was January 1st.
Okay, so if you're thinking it's 72, 74%, somewhere in there, and then the word before was, oh, we couldn't give a raise to any, or a COLA to any retirees because of the health of the fund. And if we did, I'm not saying this is the kind of argument that was given at the time. If we did, that would take that rating down for the next year. And we'd go from, say, in this case, 74%, it might drop it to 72% the next year. And if we try to do it again, because you're whittling away at your principal to pay that, correct?
That's right.
Okay. Is
Yeah.
that still true?
Yeah, this one is estimated to reduce our funded ratio by about 1.5%. It would be, the cost would be amortized over 25 years. And it would add an additional about $2 million to our operating budget. And so if there were to be another one, another COLA next year, for example, then we would have to do that again, and that would compound and compound and compound.
Okay. And that would only go for retirees that retired before 2011?
That's the retirement board's proposal.
Okay. And where did they come up with that number?
I don't know offhand.
Okay. And would that number change then in the future? Would it be retirees after 2015, or how would that?
Yeah, I mean, the entire design of a COLA could change in any given year based on the recommendation from the board. It could change what your retirement date was. They could choose different rates of COLAs depending on how long you've been retired. There's all sorts of opportunity there. But to your original question, you are right that this would be a very expensive proposition. There is no promise of a COLA. It's a defined benefit program, and that definition of that benefit does not include a COLA.
Okay. So if they haven't had a COLA since 2005, is this a shock to the system if we do this right now and because we pay the difference, try to make up? I mean, we can't make up for the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of a shock to the system, the cost in our operating budget is about 2 million. So that's a significant number. But again, spread out over time, we can plan for that. If there's a desire to do an annual COLA, then that would be a very significant hit. And we would have to have some serious discussions about how to fund that over the long term.
Is this being produced or being proposed to them as just a one-time COLA or an annual COLA?
I haven't listened to the conversations between the board and any retirees who would come to speak to them. My understanding is it's a one-time adjustment at this time.
With no promise of anything in the future unless something turns around, I guess.
Yeah, are you aware of it? Yeah, one time.
So it's been sold as a one-time COLA. And so they shouldn't expect this every year. Is it?
That's right.
On the facility maintenance, is there any indication in there, you're looking at $1 million extra for maintenance? Is there anything in there about actually consolidating properties to try to have less properties to maintain? And any?
Yes, there is a current effort looking at our overall footprint because as you know, we have to deal with either adding sprinklers to this building, which may not be cost effective, or replacing this building. And so I think our whole view of that has changed significantly due to COVID. And we're realizing that not everyone has to be in the building, or not as many people do. So there is an effort looking at what that footprint is like and where do things need to be located? Do we need to have everyone in Clayton or just some functions in Clayton and so forth? So that study is ongoing. But that doesn't change our current outlook, which is about $100 million backlog in that maintenance. And we just can't keep budgeting zero and just fixing things as they break. We know it costs us more in the long run to not do preventative maintenance. So we're just trying to establish at least some base funding so that Public Works can, try to get ahead of the curve a little bit.
And one last thing, we've had meetings for the last 7 years I've been on this board, and the highway department has always been on the short end of the stick from the standpoint of money. Is there any way that we can change this budget to give them a significant amount going forward when it comes to highway maintenance and roads and those type of projects, and to help with salaries and things in that department?
So a few things that we can talk about there. On the salary side, we are getting into a routine again of annual performance-based salary increases for our staff. We want to look and see exactly how far we are behind market and determine a way to address that. In terms of providing revenues needed for them to do their work, the existing revenue structure obviously doesn't do that for us. So they are funded by a share of the road and bridge property tax. As I mentioned to Councilmember Fitch, they're getting about 24% of every dollar they collect. The rest goes to the municipality. So that creates kind of a built-in disincentive to change that rate. If the council were vote to increase it, you would take 100% of the fallout from that action and only receive 24% of the benefit. If you were to reduce that tax, then you'd have every municipality manage it. We do have the half-cent sales tax that we split with bi-state, and the council kind of changes that percentage every year when they vote on the bi-state contract. It was typically 50-50. It's gone as high as 90% county, 10% bi-state. Now I think it's 53-47. So those funds go into our transportation program. So that would be an opportunity to leverage additional funds. In terms of other existing revenues, we have in the past allocated some of our 1% countywide sales tax to the Road and Bridge Fund in the past. But obviously the general revenue fund is not the healthiest right now. So that would have an equal effect on the general fund that we would have to deal with. The department is looking at other opportunities for increasing revenues that they can dedicate to transportation purposes. I know they've worked with the county councilor's office on what all authority we would have to pursue other revenues, and those would all have to come before the council and likely the voters as well.
Okay, thank you for that.
Any other questions for Paul? Councilman Tracus?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Paul, thanks for your comprehensive analysis, as always. A couple of questions. Whether we call it supplanting or working around or whatever the term is, I want to make sure I understand. You're suggesting that all $193+ million in ARPA funds be used or tagged as lost revenue. Am I correct on that?
Correct. Tagged as lost revenue and spent on eligible activities under the federal rules.
Right. And then in turn, that would, if I understand you correctly, free up budgeted funds for other than their earmarked purposes. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. And the determination of how those funds are used is the exclusive authority of the county executive at that point. Isn't that correct?
No, those revenues would be in the fund balance of the various funds, and those are controlled at the appropriation discretion of the county council.
Okay, so that's where I was going with this. So at least as far as you're concerned, the executive would have to come back and request an appropriation, or the department heads would have to come back and request supplemental appropriations as needed. And this council would then have the ability to determine whether or not, and if so, how much we want to appropriate.
That's right.
Okay. I wanted to make sure we're clear on that. Thank you for that. With respect to your projected budget for this year, if I understood you correctly, somewhere from historical purposes, between 92 and 93% of the budget never gets spent, right?
That's right.
Okay. So fair to say that somewhere between 7 and 8% of the budget isn't necessary, the projected or asked budget.
I would agree that it's not necessary. I think there are just things that occur in the business cycle, such as positions becoming vacant or contracts not ending up getting executed that just happen in the normal course of doing business. And that's what I'm capturing in that 7% estimate that I include in my financial plan.
But again, nothing stopping the specific department head from coming back and saying, oh, I need some additional appropriations because this happened, correct?
Yes, that's right. I would say, however, that the department can't count on the council approving a supplemental. So if we reduce these, then I would tell them that they need to reduce their plans for the year by that same amount.
Right.
Because again, they can't count on the supplemental. They have to execute a budget no greater than the appropriation limit.
I understand. These days, Paul, we can't count on much. So I'd like to ask you some questions about the structural deficit on page 26 of your presentation, if you don't mind.
Yes,
And again, this goes back to what you're projecting as the deficit, should these ARPA funds not be essentially redirected or allotted to lost revenue, right?
right.
Okay. And this, I want to make sure that I'm clear on this. This type of analysis that's shown on page 27 with respect to the fund forecast is essentially reflective, if not duplicative, but certainly reflective of the tax rate versus revenue yield you gave us back on page 11. Is that fair to say?
Yes,
Okay, that's what I thought. And so, and again, all of this assumes certain things happen. For instance, I believe you said that there might be annual increases in departments across the board, et cetera, right? And, or new programs and services, and hence increased expenses with a static or in some cases, reduced revenue, right?
that's right.
All right. And then, again, this is, as you graciously acknowledged, not new news here to most of us on this council. We hear this every year. And that at some point in the future, and according to the chart on page 27, it looks like it's around 2024, the sky falls, right? We can no longer afford to do business.
That's right.
All right. And we have to use your words, do something. And we've used those terms before. That something, if I understood you correctly, was that, and correct me if I'm wrong, was to, again, getting back to page 11, increase real estate taxes, right?
Well, we would have to do something to change the mathematical equation. That could be increasing our revenues or decreasing our spending. But ultimately, that's something that will have to come from the council and the executive in terms of exactly what that looks like.
Okay, so you're not recommending increasing taxes then, right? That's just one of two options.
That's right. I was trying to give you what levers you could pull to balance out the budget.
Certainly then, the other option is to cut programs and services and reduce the size of government.
Yes,
Right. And so we're not necessarily irrevocably tied to this concept of increasing property taxes or other types of taxes, right?
no, certainly not.
Okay. That's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Well, thank you very much. Any other questions, Councilman Fitch?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Paul, just to clarify what I heard Councilman Tracus ask you to make sure that I have this right on the money, like for example, for CAD, that would go into our, so that would have to be a request that comes to us, the council, after the first of the year, after the budget's passed. Is that what you're saying?
It wouldn't have to be even a request that comes to council. You know, the council can bring forward supplementals at its discretion as well. But because it's not in this budget, the council could amend the recommended budget to include whatever it wants to include or exclude.
Okay.
Or after the beginning of the year, a supplemental could be brought forth to change the budget in any way.
Okay, so by us, if we approve the budget and move ARPA funds into lost revenue for these years that you've requested, if we do that, and it's now in the, I'll call it the bank, that doesn't mean, for example, the county executive could take that money and spend it however he chooses, like he did with the CARES Act money. Am I correct?
That's right. The funds would not be appropriated until the council were to take action on that.
We just have to make sure that when the bills come to us for approval, it doesn't say and appropriate these funds. That's what happened with the CARES Act money. We also appropriated 100% of that money at the same time.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just also say you'd want to be mindful of the deficit because some of those funds would also help us eliminate that and give us operating capital to go forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Paul, which one of these, and I want you to point me to the page where you have put together this budget without the ARPA funds in it. Do you have that in this budget?
No, I'm happy to show you what the financial plan tables would look like without it.
Well, I want to see that separately, but I do want to know what this budget looks like without the ARPA funds, because that seems to be a lot of concern, a lot of stress, or a lot of suggestions into doing that. And of course, we need to make sure without that, what we do. Now, let me ask you this question. If we can put this money into our general revenue and we can spend it as we want to, what's the purpose in having a federal oversight of these funds in the first place, if that's allowable? And I'm assuming you're telling me that it is allowable that we take the ARPA funds and dump them into our general revenue.
We can use the ARPA funds to recover lost revenue, but we have to use it for a federally allowable purpose. And those two things that are the easiest for us are public safety and public health services. So we don't just take the federal funds and put them in the bank. We use them to maintain our, say, police services or our court services and our public health department services. At the same time, we can then take existing revenues that we had planned to use for those purposes and move those out to our fund balance.
And I heard the word supplant, and that's kind of the way, that's what's in my mind, that we're supplanting those funds, not really gaining us anything at all. Back to the building as you were talking about, and what we're looking at in terms of an absolute facility here. Of course, we are in the probably the most expensive real estate in the county, and so I'm asking about, have there been any plans, any thought processes to how we will do that? Of course, I'm looking here, and we're just in my mind, you're throwing good money after bad, because I think even with the city of Clayton, that we do not meet their specifications for a building. That's what I've been told. I don't know if that's the case or not.
Yes.
So at some point, we're going to have to make a change. We're going to have to do something, because I think the asbestos removal will probably be more than a new building if my information is correct. So where have we put that in here as a possibility of what may happen? And it may not be next year, so maybe but I think that that's a significant expense that we're going to have to figure out how we're going to do that. Has there been any thought to that or at all?
Well, there's definitely thinking going on behind it. There's nothing in this recommended budget because we've got some more time before we would do something. As I mentioned to Councilmember Harder, there is a group that's looking at whether, again, we all need to be in Clayton or just the courts and those functions that are required to be here, such as the council. Would we potentially move the other services to potentially a satellite location? Could we have a smaller footprint here because so many of our employees can do their work remotely? So all of those things are being considered, as well as how we would fund those. I would say that if we were building a new building, the cheapest way would be to issue general obligation bonds, and that would require a vote of the people to authorize the project. But that would definitely get us the lowest cost of borrowing. We have other opportunities available to us, such as special obligation bonds, but those require the annual appropriation pledge of the council. And then we're looking to see what other opportunities are there, such as would there be an opportunity for a public-private partnership, or what other creative financing structures could we come up with to allow us to achieve our objectives and reduce our costs. But to your point, yes, we do realize that this is very expensive real estate. It's difficult sometimes for our customers to get here and park and come into the building for services. So there's a team that's looking at reimagining what that all looks like.
But I think according to the charter, we have to have some presence here.
That's right.
Is that correct? How many facilities are we renting at this particular point?
I don't know that number off the top of my head. Stephanie Streeter will when she talks to you from Transportation Public Works, but I will also follow up with you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Let me get Councilman Harder for a second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go back to the use tax. If that were to be implemented, and it would take a vote of the people in April or so of next year, if that were to happen, what's your anticipation of how much money we would get from that use tax?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we extrapolated a state fiscal note that they did on the original legislation and had to make some pretty broad assumptions. So our estimate is 10 to 15 million. My understanding is that the portion of the use tax that's generated, because the use tax again mirrors our sales tax rates, the portion generated by the mirroring of the 1% countywide tax would be shared with municipalities. And I've heard the municipal league state that they would also demand that the Prop P portion also be shared with the municipalities as well. So I think those discussions will have to happen between the municipalities and the county as well.
So under a use tax, with all Prop P and everything, are you still looking at 10 to 15 million, which would be the county's portion of that,
Right.
correct?
That's right, and it's a very rough estimate. We
Okay,
don't have good data with which to model that. You know, we don't have good data on how much purchasing individuals are doing with out-of-state vendors. So I want to disclaim that that's a very rough estimate.
but that would be a tax that in some cases already being collected on online purchases. We're just not seeing it coming into ours.
It's not being collected for the county. There is no use tax in St. Louis County. Some municipalities have it, but the county does not.
Okay, so, but the state has been collecting for a while now.
They've been collecting, I know, from Amazon. I'm not sure if they've been collecting from every retailer though.
Okay, so if that comes to fruition, then that's 10 to 15 million that we didn't have today,
That's right.
that we could use for expansion or just to keep the doors open, correct?
That's right.
Okay. So if that's implemented, and that could be implemented, that would be a source, a good source for income, without being too much different on people's purchases, or would it be? I mean, I think a lot of Amazons are already collecting some of that already.
They're collecting the state portion, but not the local portions. So it would increase those out-of-state purchases that an individual consumer is making. It would also, I guess, bring some level of fairness between the brick and mortar store next door and the internet store.
Okay. And that, what's your good probability, or you have a probability of that actually happening in next year?
Of a use tax passing, I offer no estimate on that.
Okay, because the municipal league is going to push for that. And if they get it implemented in all the municipalities and we don't, we're going to be at a disadvantage, correct?
Yes, they would be achieving new revenue and we would not.
Okay. There was another issue going back to, I guess going back to real estate. Have we been investing in this building? I see a lot of, new sprinkler heads and plumbing. Has it been a plan that you take like a floor a year and change things, or have we stopped doing that when it comes to this building? And what is the timeline that we have to have all the compliance done for this building?
I will defer you to Stephanie Leon Streeter when she comes before you, but I believe we have I think 6 more years before we have to have this building sprinklered to meet the Clayton fire codes.
Okay,
And generally they're fixing systems. We're talking about maintenance of building systems, HVAC, plumbing. They're fixing things as they break,
which we would do anyway, whether we were.
which we
staying-
have to in order to keep the building operational.
Correct.
But we're not doing any of that preventative work to keep that from happening. And so we know that it costs us more to fix and deal with a disaster than it does, to do that preventative maintenance.
How much of this building is vacant?
I don't know offhand.
Okay. How much, do you know how much of the buildings that we are under contract out at Northwest Crossing are vacant?
I don't offhand.
Thank you.
Councilman Fitch?
Just one last, I don't think Councilman Harder asked this directly, but in the budget for 2022, are there any revenues set aside for sales of county buildings?
No.
You know what I'm talking about, across the street? I mean, how's that coming along, or?
I know we had a contract, or almost had a contract on the parcels on Merrimack that did not come to fruition. So until there is a contract or something formalized, I won't count the revenue in the budget.
That
I
would be
don't know
a
the
significant
status.
increase if we sold them at the price we think it's worth. Is that right? Would that just go into general revenue and the fund balance?
Right,
That's where it goes?
that's right, yes.
Okay, thank you.
One last question for me. When we do a supplemental, do you check to make sure that there's adequate funds for a supplemental before we get that?
I do.
Okay, all right. Any further questions? On the video? No one else?
Just a follow-up on the real estate. So the building across the street, that was sold last year. The old 7-Up building, as I referred to.
No, it's not been sold yet.
I thought that was sold and closed.
And no,
So we never got anything for that.
not yet.
And I thought about the same time, the courts building over there was sold?
That has been sold and that's closed, and those funds came in during 2020. It's
Okay,
about $8 million.
so the 7-Up building is still for sale.
Right, those two Merrimack parcels, the old 7-Up building and where the health department used to stand. And then we have the parking lot across the street available as well.
Okay, so those are still available for sale, but I thought they were through the Port Authority. I thought those closed a long time ago.
They have not closed. I know they're marketing the Merrimack parcels
Okay.
or were a short time ago.
So if we're using a lot of the ARPA funds and CARES funds to beef up the health department, are we setting ourselves up for failure in 2024, 25, 26, when those funds are not available and we've created a health infrastructure that needs to be supported? Have you done any kind of projections for that? And what does that look like going forward?
Yeah, if you look at page 29 of the packet, are we setting ourselves up for trouble? Yes, in the general fund and the health fund. You know, again, the revenues structure that we have now is insufficient to support our existing service levels. We extend the amount of time we can operate by pulling in the federal funds to continue maintaining our existing services. But we will get to the end of the road. Again, my projections are 2024, 2025. And I always think of Councilmember Fitch when I talk about this, because I think back when you were a lieutenant colonel, you and Bill Howe would always stop me and say, you always say the end is coming and it never gets here. And two things I think are just important to remember. Number one, we can't let it get here because we can't deficit spend in terms of if our fund balance is gone, we're in big trouble. And we've had a number of things happen over the year. We've had a casino open that gave us $10 million of annual revenue. We had Prop E come online, that's 50 million. We moved some property tax levies around, and now we have this potential for an influx of federal funds. Without those things happening, this discussion would have happened. Oh, and let me not forget, in 2011 and 2012, we had some significant cuts to our parks department. So without those things happening, we would have had this discussion a long time ago. I don't know what's going to happen in 2022 through 2024. Maybe there will be something that'll happen to allow us to push out this end date a little longer. Maybe there'll be something that happens that moves it forward. This is just my planning tool that I wanted to share with you that I'm using constantly to try to model out what I think this will look like. But we will get to the point where we're going to have to fix that math equation. And we'll either have to increase the revenue amount or decrease the spending amount.
So going back to my question again, are we creating a health department that is set up for a pandemic? And then when the pandemic goes away, we've got a huge health department that is going to have to change mission, or it's going to have to push their efforts somewhere else, or we're going to have to cut to get that back into ratio to all the other departments.
I think if there was an end to the pandemic, they could abandon a lot of those costs that we're now pushing into the health fund. But if they have to maintain their heightened level of service for a number of years, it's going to be a difficult situation for us to fix.
But the purpose of the ARPA funds is to help fund that effort, correct?
Right, and that's what we're doing by recommending that those funds be moved into the health fund to maintain service levels. But when those funds expire, then we've got to find either replacement revenue or service reductions to balance that budget out.
Okay, so we would have to decide at that point where to make the cuts in the health department, and those are not always a happy time.
That's right. Based on my estimates, those conversations would have to be complete by 2024 or 2025.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. I think that this has been really good. Councilman Fitch?
Maybe just one last comment, really. By giving the health department such a huge increase in funds, it almost incentivizes them to keep this going, to keep this pandemic going, to keep this going. That bothers me. Just wanted to make a statement, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. You can respond.
Yes, the allocation of the transfers in that I've included in my financial plan would keep both the general fund and the health fund moving towards 2024, 2025. If we wanted to change that allocation, we could certainly do that to push more one way or the other. So this is not set in stone. I didn't, on my health fund forecast, want to assume a date when those additional services would no longer be required. So again, this kind of represents just my status quo view of what the world would look like. But those allocations in our financial plan can always be modified.
And that merely means layoffs, if that in the future.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point as well. That sometimes I hear us say we want to maintain services with less staff, or we want to cut staff but not impact services. And our services are our people. So those two things are directly linked. You can't have one without the other. The other thing I would want to say is that since 2010, we've been giving our departments and offices death by 1,000 paper cuts. We've been cutting them a little bit here and there and saying, you know, you're going to have less tools, but you got to produce the same level of service. So my recommendation would always be, let's not continue to do that. Let's determine what services we no longer want to offer, stop funding those services, and fund what's left correctly. So I think that would be the best case result if we were looking at a service reduction approach.
Thank you.
Councilman Tracus?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Paul, your graph on page 29 anticipates or projects a significant increase in the health department ad nauseum through 2026, right? All based on the assumption that the pandemic never ceases. That's fair to say, at least at the way the chart looks.
Yes, I don't have a crystal ball to say, and I would hesitate to say, okay, well, in 2024, we can drop that back to more of a normalized amount. So it's really just showing you that visual of if this happens, here's the result. And if this changes, then we'll readjust our models.
If I heard you correctly earlier, some of that would go to clinics so people can come in and get whatever care they COVID related needed. Is that right?
Right. We are currently funding a lot of our COVID response with federal funds, with the CARES Act funds. We know we will need to use federal funds to maintain those services. And I would like to see those come into the health fund as opposed to spending directly from the CARES fund.
No, I understand that, Paul. My concern is when those federal funds are gone, you've got, to use the current term, an infrastructure in place that is no longer needed, but in my opinion, in my experience, is hardly going to be abandoned. So to Councilman Harder's point, we've created a Frankenstein that we now cannot get rid of. So unless someone can give us some really substantive basis to expand the health department along the lines you've outlined, I don't see being able to support it myself, because once it's created, it's not going to disappear. That's not a question, Paul. It's just a statement for me. Thank you for your time today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And Paul, I think that to the point that we have to learn how to live within our means. We are not doing that. And I think the more, for instance, we have been spoiled with this federal funds. They come in and we figure we can hire 15 people, we can do whatever we need to do. But we know that that is not sustainable. And I think that's the message that this council is trying to get over to you, that we need to live within our means. And if whatever that is and however that is, we're going to have to bite the bullet and do that. And so I appreciate your time. If there are no further questions, I will have Chris to come up. Thank you so much. Chris, you can come up and wrap us up, please. And then we'll have questions and comments if any of the other council members, and then we'll go to public comment.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I have to break away now. I've got another matter that I'm already late for, so I'm going to have to leave at this point, but thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Councilman Tracus. So we'll see you later this evening.
Madam Chair and Council, thank you. I had been asked to go through the budget presentation from Paul and the documents from the county executive, and really just do my best to raise questions and concerns that the council should be aware of. I'm going to do my best to take out all those questions and concerns that have already been raised by council. But in response, the first thing I will mention is one of the conversations that was had here today is on appropriation authority. So unlike CARES, where the county executive have been given full authority, ARPA is at the discretion of the appropriating authority of this council. And the reason I bring this up is one of the conversations was, will the county executive have control or will the council have control? And the answer is yes, because according to the presentation, budgeted dollars from ARPA being supplanted within that budget are in the budget. When you pass those budget bills, you are appropriating. So once you've done that, that is giving the control to the county executive and the departments to spend those funds. The unappropriated balance of the general fund or the health fund or the park fund or any of the other 24 funds then is at the purview of the council to spend based on supplementals. But when you appropriate this budget, you're giving that appropriation authority then to the county executive. So I wanted to make that point clear. The other thing is that based on the presentation, the spending is based on COVID not ending. Dear Lord in heaven, I hope that that's not true, that it does in fact end. But one of the questions that I was asked by several council members to look at was sustainability. By the charts that were presented, everything falls off the cliff in 2024. If we don't have a sustainable plan, if we can't figure out how to not spend more money, I don't want to be here in 2024 when the blood is running out of the building for all the people we're going to have to let go. To the best case scenario, if we look at this year's structural deficit tell me if I get it wrong, it's about 37 million in the general fund. 2021, so 17. So if we pass the Wayfair tax and we don't use ARPA, that will cover 1 year, but it won't cover the next year. If you raise property tax to its maximum ceiling in the general fund, that'll cover the next year, but it won't cover any year after that. You see where I'm going with this? You're going to quickly run out of revenue sources to generate to cover that budget. So on the supplanting discussion, the purpose, I think, of doing that, or why the county executive is recommending it, is it does take a lot of the costs. So remember, we had this discussion previously we set aside $500,000 of the ARPA funds for costs related to Deloitte. If we are to not do the recommended plan from the county executive, not only will you have to set aside more money for that, but you will also have to set aside more money for outside legal review because there are two components. There's the compliance and then there's the legal component. And the county counselor's office in the past has told us that they would need that. By doing the supplanting of the federal funds, that does eliminate those costs and does create greater flexibility. But I think the greater question for the council long-term will be to exactly how much in the next two, not just this year, I know we're here to discuss this year, but as we look forward for the next 3 years, how much of the ARPA, the replaced funds are we using to be baked into the cake of the budget for each of the next 3 years? How much will that leave in the unappropriated balance of the health fund and the general fund? Those are the two big funds we're talking about here. And then how can we reduce the costs so that we can live past 2024? And I think those are, and the reason I don't necessarily have the answers, listen, this is day one. We have a lot of budget hearings to come forward. We're going to hear from a lot of budget directors. I had a long list of questions, but I have a feeling we'll get those questions answered as we go through it. But raising the property tax to its maximum level is, I think, untenable. I don't think I think you will put people out of their homes, and I don't know that that's a viable option long-term. 8%, Councilman Tracus had mentioned the 8% that's basically returned every year in the budget that's unspent, unallocated. So I think we may have to look at kind of how our budgeting from a macro level looks as we kind of look at those. And, listen, I have all the respect in the world for Paul. I think he does a very good job being very conservative, very cautious. And I love that about him, but I think we have to look at those pieces of it as well. Some of the additions to the budget, payroll was adequately demonstrated through the presentation, is our biggest expense. People are our biggest expense. People are our biggest investment. And there's good reason for that. But when we're looking at adding lots of people in certain departments, I think we have to really ask ourselves, are we going to get the production, the effectiveness, the value for that dollar, not just this year, but in 2024 when the floor falls out? And I think those are other considerations. Specifically, you know, we've got the health budget that we've talked about with a lot of additions due to COVID that may or may not sustain. Prosecuting attorney's office has got a massive increase in their staff. Again, I think we have to look at really what the bang for that buck is going to be. Finally, just a couple of related housekeeping things. Listen, you're the appropriating authority. My job is to try to help you. As you go through each of these individual departments and you say to yourself, hey, you know what? I think we need to add whatever that program was that you CAD for the police, or I want to take away CAD for the police, whichever side of that fence you're on. It will be helpful if you will let me know what those changes may be, so that when we get to where we're dropping budget bills and we want to make changes, that we can track those and it's easier to plug in instead of bogging the system down. I would highly recommend that if the council were to hypothetically, not a recommendation here, I'm just being hypothetical. If the council would say, we want to reduce the budget of X by 5%, I would ask this council to work with me and to, of course, work with Paul and his team to be specific on what it is we're cutting that equals that 5%. Don't hand the department a budget that says, well, we're just going to cut this by 5%. Then you take the council needs to be specific in exactly what it is it doesn't want in a budget. Or if we want to raise a budget, specifically what it is that you want to raise that budget by. I would consider that very important.
Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Questions for Paul?
Me for Chris.
Councilwoman Clancy?
Yes, Paul, I appreciate the objectivity with which you presented. Chris, I appreciate your comments and your review as well. I did hear some things in what you said that I think go into some of the values and subjectivity that's before us. And I'm picking up on a theme about the pandemic being over versus not over. Do you dispute, and this is from the conversation in general, and you addressed it as well. Do you dispute that people's lives have been forever changed by this, and that there's actually a lot of needs that existed prior to the pandemic that have been exacerbated, which could lend themselves to greater funding needs in St. Louis County, which I think is part of why we're seeing increases in public health, and also why at least two members of the council have proposed using $50 million in ARPA funds for a North County health center.
I don't deny that at all. As a matter of
Okay.
fact, I would suggest that if you look at, let's just say, mental health, right? And look at the effect that it have been on children. And I've just from personal experience, I've known 2 children that committed suicide during the pandemic. You can't deny these things. And I'm not suggesting that. I guess what I'm suggesting is, are we really looking at, is mental health going to be, I'm just using this as an example. I don't, just throwing it out there. Is that going to be a focus of what the additional funds that the health department wants to use? Well, then that's a worthwhile conversation to have. I'm just saying we should have that conversation. I don't think we can deny that the pandemic has not only changed people's personal lives, it's changed our economy, it's changed everything. I mean, the world is in every way a different place because of this pandemic.
Okay. I appreciate you clarifying that. And then I also wanted to go back. I had to step away, but I was to take care of a personal matter, but I was listening on YouTube. I thought I heard something that, well, let me just ask it this way. Paul, is there anything that you heard Chris say that you dispute on a factual basis at all? Okay. There was something that you said about the appropriating authority that I may have missed. I thought I heard you say that.
I was just trying to clarify the earlier conversation over there was kind of this discussion amongst council members, who's in control of the money.
Okay.
And so all I was trying to do is clarify that by saying, listen, like CARES, where the council gave the county executive the appropriating authority. So the county executive has that full discretion. The money that is in the unappropriated balance of these funds, the appropriating authority then lies with you, the council.
Okay.
The money that is put into the budget, so we have the 24 budget bills,
Yes.
the general fund, the health fund, the parks fund, all these different funds. As you pass those bills, you're appropriating those funds, therefore giving the authority for the county executive and the departments to spend that money.
Okay. I thought I heard you say that the county executive would then would have some appropriation authority based on Paul's proposal of what was presented to us based on filling in our revenue holes.
If I said that, I
Okay.
misspoke.
And I might have misheard that.
Okay,
'cause I was
yeah,
multitasking,
that wasn't
but-
my intent.
Okay,
I was just trying to clear up, there was a conversation, I believe, with Councilman Fitch and Paul and Councilman Tracus and Paul about who was in control of the appropriating
Yes.
authority. I was simply trying to
do
clarify.
you,
I hope I did.
do you happen to know if we were to put Wayfair on the ballot when, this is a legal question, but perhaps you've looked into it and would know, do you know when we would have to, the council would have to take action to get that on the ballot in April?
I think, huh?
By the end of filing
I would
date,
imagine by
probably.
filing.
Yeah, you'd have to
Mhm.
put it on the filing with the rest of the April ballot.
Which is when, do you know?
It's in January sometime, isn't it?
It ends in January, I believe.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't have the date. I haven't looked at this year's dates
Okay.
to look at
okay,
that.
we'll follow up with legal just to make sure. Okay.
That's
got
an
it.
elections question, but
Okay,
yeah.
got it. Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair, can I just clarify one thing? I think that what Chris was trying to say and maybe came out wrong, and it responds to what Councilmember Clancy was asking. The county executive never has the appropriating authority. The appropriations authority always stays with the council under the charter. But once the council appropriates the money, then the county executive has the spending authority given to him subsequent to the appropriations. That was true in CARES. That's will be true in ARPA, and that'll be true in any other appropriation of funds.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Sure.
Councilman Fitch.
So for Mickey, so you're telling us if we take this ARPA money and dump it into the budget for this year, as Paul's requested, 85 million and some change, by putting that into the budget, it's now appropriated and the county executive can spend it as he deems necessary?
Not necessarily. It's only if the council appropriates it. The council can accept the funds and put it into.
Which we've already done.
And put it into an unappropriated account.
Okay.
And then depending on in the budget, where you choose to appropriate funds. The annual budget, you generally appropriate funds to each department. You know, it's usually the county executive's recommendation as amended by the council. And then you choose to make those appropriations. And then depending on the appropriations, that sets the framework for spending.
So we have to make sure the budget bills are worded properly that doesn't give the county executive 100% control over spending the ARPA funds that we put in.
That's a decision of the
Okay.
council.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Anything else, Chris?
No, ma'am.
We do have a hearing here, but I do want to make sure that we have public comment at this particular point. Mr. Clerk, do we have someone?
Yes, ma'am. We have one individual signed up, Mr. Ed Golterman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, 62222 or something, Kirkwood. I didn't want to come back until I could put real shoes on.
Okay.
And it's been a while, and thank you for your good wishes. I appreciate that very much. This is not day one. You're at the last day of 50 years of horrible decision makings on where you send your money and where you spend your money. It's already 2024. It's here. I think you need to take some very bold action. And I believe you have some options that are not raising taxes, which is a very iffy situation right now because municipalities are raising taxes now and others are. I think what you can do is seek a pie chart that breaks down the 200 billion a year of county collected tax money that goes into the city. About half of that goes into Forest Park, I think. I mean, I don't have the total numbers. About half of that goes downtown to grow the sports empire and the convention center. So I would think if you took a look at that and you made some judgment, is do they need that money? You know, do the zoo and museums continue to need that money? Or should those taxes have been abolished like 25 years ago when I suggested? The other thing is I would break out conventions from ball fields and parks and community centers. I think convention planning and marketing is a profession, and it's a profession that is in a highly competitive field. And, you know, ball fields come under parks. I believe most of us pay like 3 or 4 different parks out of our personal property tax. I know some of our, maybe even our sales tax money goes to parks. So as you progress in your hearings, get some definitions of categories where, you know, that fit, things that fit. And I don't throw live music and dead art in the same, you know, I don't think they're the same. I think one does one thing, the other does another. You know, convention and tourism does one thing, parks and recreation does another. So good luck to you, and you have a tighter time frame than I think we think you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is that it? All right. Any further discussion from the council before we adjourn and re-up in 2 seconds? Councilman Fitch.
Can I suggest a 5-minute break?
Yes, thank you. Okay, any further discussion? Motion to adjourn? I'm sorry, Councilwoman Dunaway.
No worries. My question is all logistics. Do I need to log into a new link or do I just stay in on this one during our 5-minute break?
That would be a Kevin question.
If you received a separate link for the next meeting, you'll need to log into that one. So you have to log out of this and log into the other link. Yes.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Motion to
Sorry.
adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second?
all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
Bye.
Thank you. Be 5 minutes, please. Thank you.